was given at Mount Sinai. Before they were there to accept the Torah, they were asked whether they would accept it. And they said the famous words, Naaseh V'nishma, we will do it and we will hear it. In other words, unlike the other nations that were consulted about the Torah, according to the Midrash, who said, give us a sample of what you want us to accept. And every nation that heard of a sample of the Torah said, no, that's not for us. When God approached the Jewish people, the Midrash tells us, they didn't say, tell us what it's about. We'll have to decide, we'll have to have a meeting to decide if it's for us. They said, Naaseh, we'll do it. Whatever you want us to do, we'll do it. And V'nishma, then we'll hear what it's all about. And that was the unique response that the Jewish people had, for which they were awarded crowns. 2 crowns they were put on their heads. Later on, they had to take the crowns off when they worshipped the golden calf, because they were so enthusiastic to get the Torah that they didn't even want to hear what it's about before they accepted it. There's a midrash that says that when the Jewish people said, Naaseh V'nishma, we will do and we will hear, God said, V'yichu li Terumah, take from me a contribution. Well, that's the beginning of this week's Torah portion. What exactly is that all about? This is about donating to the construction of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary in the desert. But what does their saying, Naaseh V'nishma, we will do and we will hear, have to do with this commandment to take something for the sanctuary? What's the connection? And the Baal Shem Tov answered that, you know what? Enthusiasm is great, but it doesn't mean a thing if it's not connected immediately to some type of an act. People can get inspired and they could feel great about a certain project, about a certain way of life, and about a commandment, and about something that's truly inspirational. And then, if they don't connect it to something practical, something tangible, to something concrete, it'll fizzle out. That's the human nature. We become inspired, we get excited about things, and genuinely so. We're not putting down what they're saying, Naaseh V'nishma, we will do and we will hear. It was real and commendable. But God says it's not good enough. I want to see some action. I want you to translate your enthusiasm in action. I remember there was once a Farbrengen on Shabbos, a gathering where the Rabbi was speaking. And the Rabbi was talking about the importance of loving your fellow, about true love and friendship and unity. And at Shabbos, what could you do to translate that message into action? So the Rebbe says you can't give charity to a poor person on Shabbos. So pour some l'chaim, pour some wine, and give it to your fellow next to you. It's not enough that I'm speaking about the importance of loving your fellow, importance of unity, and you're all impressed and all inspired and you're really gung-ho on it. Translate it into action immediately, even if it's a minor action, even if it's just a gesture. But human beings are physical beings. Yes, we have a spiritual side to ourselves, but we're basically human, down-to-earth human beings. And we are impacted mostly by action more than by words. So anytime we hear a message that's inspiring, take the phone, call someone up, and wish them something. Say, how you feeling? Even though there's no real urgency to that, but that's not the point. The point is you're inspired, do something, even if it's a minor thing. That's a general message that we learn. So that's what the Midrash means when it says, when the people said, Naaseh V'nishma, they were all excited and full of enthusiasm. God says, translate it, give something, do something concrete. So what were they told to do? V'yikchu li truma. Take from me a truma. What does the word truma mean? It has different translations. One translation is an offering. Take from me an offering. That's a little, if you're an English teacher, I think you would fail the student for writing English that way. When you're asking someone to give something, you don't say take something for the other person. Give something to the other person. And here it says take. So one explanation is that when you give, you're really taking. When you give, you get much more than what you gave. Because what you gave is finite. Yes, it has value. A person donates $1 million. That's a phenomenal amount. But it's finite. $1 million is less than $1 billion. A lot less. But what you get is infinite. Because what you get is validation that you are legitimate, that you are worthy of your existence in this world. What makes us worthy of existing in this world? The fact that we accomplish something good for someone else. The Rabbi would always say, when he would talk to people one-on-one, he would say, he would quote his father-in-law, whenever two Jews meet, they should always involve in their discussion what they can do for the third person. It was never meet to talk about something that didn't involve another. The Rabbi said it doesn't mean only a third. It could be a fourth and a fifth and a sixth and a seventh. But it means it should never just stay with two. The two should always lead to at least a third person. So when you give, you're actually taking more than what you're giving. That's one approach to that. And there's another approach that is a general idea when it comes to giving. When the Torah later on in Deuteronomy talks about giving tzedakah, it says, Nason titain, give, you shall give. It's a double expression. And usually when it's a double expression, the translations are, you shall indeed give, you shall definitely give. But it's repeated. Why does the Torah repeat the word give? Giving is giving. So there are two ways of explaining it. The two problems, let me not use the word problems, the two deficiencies in giving, even though giving is a mitzvah and it's great, there could be two deficiencies. One is a person is giving, but they're reluctant to give. It's hard to part with your hard-earned money for some people. Not everyone suffers from that, but some people suffer from that. It's hard for them to part because they worked hard to earn the money. It's hard to part with it. So they give, but they give begrudgingly, or at least not with joy, not with enthusiasm. It's still a mitzvah. The main thing is that the needy person or organization still receives the money, or if it's money. But still, in terms of what you have achieved with yourself, you're lacking something. So what's the solution? The solution is keep on giving. When you keep on giving, it'll condition you to become comfortable with giving. That's why the Rambam says that if you have a choice, and this is a general statement, there could be many exceptions to it. If you have a choice of giving $100, let's say, in one shot, or you can give $1 a day, 100 days, it's better to give $1 a day for 100 days. And I say it's a general idea because sometimes the organization or the poor person needs the money now, and you're going to be at his expense. You're going to say, well, wait 100 days before you'll be able to buy yourself some food. It doesn't work that way. But the point is that every time you give, even if it's a small amount, it refines you. It makes you comfortable with giving. So even if the first time you say, I'm giving, but I really don't feel comfortable, or even if you don't say you don't feel comfortable, but you don't give it with your whole heart and with joy and enthusiasm, give it again, do again, keep on repeating. Repetition will condition you to feel comfortable with it. That's one deficiency that some people, present company excluded of course, feel uncomfortable with giving, and they have to keep on giving to be comfortable. Then there's the opposite problem. Sometimes people give because they feel uncomfortable with the other person's poverty. They feel uncomfortable. It bothers them that someone else is hungry. They see a homeless person who's emaciated. They feel terrible. So what do? They'll help. But they're not doing it because of the goodness of their heart. They want to share what they have with others. They just feel uncomfortable. So they're giving to take away their own discomfort. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not a bad thing, but it's not the ideal. So what do? They give once, and after they got rid of their own feeling of discomfort, they give again. There's an actual story where a rabbi in Jerusalem, a poor person came to ask him for some help. He gave him a nice donation, and the man leaves, and the rabbi tells his student, go get him back here. He brings him back, and he gives him another donation. So the student thought the rabbi probably thought he gave him too little, so he calls him back. This happened again and again and again. Every time he would give a donation, the man would leave, and he would call him back and give him another donation. So the student says, what's going on over here? If you knew you wanted to give more, you could have given it in one shot. He says, the first time I give for myself. I feel uncomfortable looking at a person who is needy and poor. I don't feel comfortable, so I get rid of my discomfort by giving him. Now that I got rid of my discomfort, I'm giving him because of him. So that's why the Torah repeats itself, because sometimes you're a person who doesn't like to give, so you have to keep on repeating it to change your attitude. And sometimes you really want to give, but for the wrong reason, not for the ideal reason, so you have to give again, so it's for the ideal reason. One way of taking care of this problem, of both problems, that's why there's a concept in Judaism called a pushka. What's a pushka? A charity box. Now, what's the idea behind it? There are many ideas behind it. I mean, the idea is giving, but the first time you give, you might give reluctantly, but it's not going to the cause. When you fill up the pushka and then you bring it to the poor person or the organization, you don't feel any guilt anymore. You don't feel uncomfortable anymore because they already gave it away. It's no longer you no longer have to force yourself to give something to someone else. You no longer do it because you feel bad for the other person. You're doing it without any lack of enthusiasm, because you're happy to give it. You have a full pushka. You're very happy. I can give it away now. There's no feeling of reluctance, and there's no feeling of I'm doing it for myself. Those are the two forms of giving, and that's why it says over here, "V'yikchu li truma," take from me the offering. What does he mean by take? You didn't give it to the cause yet. You gave it to yourself. You put it aside, and it's still in your home. And then you tell the needy cause, come and take it, because I already gave it. I already gave it, and now you're coming to take it. The same is true about when we ask God for Mashiach, for redemption. There can be different reasons why we want it. And one reason could be there's suffering and pain in the world, and we want to get rid of that. There can be all sorts of ulterior motives. So we have to take the ideas of Mashiach and bring it into our lives now. That our desire for it shouldn't be based on some ulterior motive. It should be based on the fact that Mashiach is not about taking the evil in the world and getting rid of it. It's that, but it's much more than that. It's revealing God in this world and bringing God into our actions. Just like when it comes to tzedakah, you can't just give. You have to give for the ulterior motive, perhaps, but then you do it for the real motive. The same way, when we yearn for Mashiach, we yearn for reasons, for benefits that we will experience. We'll have as much money that as we would want, we would have good health, we will have everything positive in our lives. That's all wonderful. But then we should also then go to the next level, that we're doing it for a higher purpose, because this is what God wants to be able to live in this world, and He should be fully revealed. Getting back to the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary in the desert, God says, let them take an offering. Each person should give what his heart desires. And it lists the things that He wanted them to contribute. Gold, silver, copper, blue wool, purple wool, and red wool, and linen, and all sorts of things. Rashi lists a total of 13 things. And this takes us to the number 13 in Judaism. In other cultures, 13 is an unlucky number, especially if it's on Friday. For Jews, if there's any such thing as a lucky number, it would be 13, and Friday. First of all, Friday is the day that God created humanity. Secondly, every day of the week, except for Monday, the Torah says God saw that it was good. On Tuesday, God said it was good twice. On Friday, He also said it was good twice. So Friday is a patently positive day, and 13 is a very positive number. I once made a list. I don't have it here, and I don't remember everything on that list. But I made a list of at least 13 things that relate to the number 13. One of them is in the Torah. God tells Moses, if you mention these 13 traits, this will bring forgiveness to the people after they worship the golden calf. They're called the 13 attributes of mercy. That's 13. Of course, a child becomes bar mitzvah at the age of 13. What about a girl? A girl becomes bat mitzvah at the age of 12, but it's not really just 12. It's 12, and she is already entering into her 13th year. So men need the whole 13 years to mature. The women get it just the beginning of the 13th year, but it's still 13. We have, and we say this in our daily prayers, quoting the Midrash, that the Torah can be interpreted using 13 principles. Torah interpretation is divided into 13 principles. What else do we have that's 13? Maimonides establishes that there are 13 principles of faith. And here we have 13 items that were used to construct a sanctuary, a place in which and through which God would be revealed. Why is 13 such a significant number? Because 13 is the same numerical value as the word echad, one. There's one God. So 13 is actually points to the unity of God, that there's one God. And when we have 13 methods of Torah interpretation, it points to the fact that there's one Torah. We have Torahs divided into many parts, but it's one unified Torah. All of it is divine. All of it was divinely given at Sinai. The same thing is true with the 13 attributes of mercy. These are God's attributes, but it's all one. It's not 13. Just 13 ways in which it manifests itself. Because God is absolutely one. God is not a composite of different parts. God is one, but He manifests Himself in many ways. It's like the sun comes into the windows here, in Buffalo sometimes, and it comes into the house next door as well. But there's only one sun, but the sun divides itself up into different locations where its light radiates. God is one, but He manifests Himself through 13. So that's why the number 13 is significant, because it points to the fact that in spite of all the multiplicity in the world, it all goes back to echad, to one. Also, the word ahava, love, adds up to 13, because in Hebrew every letter is also a number. So 13 is a very powerful number because it represents the unity of God, the unity of Torah, the unity of the Jewish people, and the unity of the sanctuary. It was a place in which God's unity was revealed. When you entered into the sanctuary and you came out feeling different, what did you come out feeling? You came out feeling the total unity that exists in this world. One of the miracles in the temple, in Ethics of the Fathers, it says, was the fact that people would stand squeezed together. It was the most crowded experience, but when it came time for people to bow down, there was plenty of room for everyone. That was a great miracle, obviously, but what's the conceptual idea behind that? That in the place of the temple, even though there were separate bodies, and when they bowed down, everyone was a separate entity, they were all really one. It represented and revealed this idea of total unity. That's the significance of the number 13. Talking about giving tzedakah, to go back to that theme, the Hebrew word for ani, for poor, adds up to, ani is ayin, 70, nun is 50, and yud is 10. 70 and 50, 120, 130. If you take off the 0, it's 13. The word for ashir, rich, ashir is 70, 300, 10, 200. So 370, 380, 580. 5 and 8 is 13. So poor and rich are essentially the same. The giver and the receiver are both givers. They're both giving and they're both receiving. But if you put the two together, rich and poor, then what do you get from 13 times 2? 26. 26 is the numerical value of God's name. When the poor and the rich come together, and they have this complementary relationship, each one is giving and each one is taking, because the rich person is giving, but he's also getting something, the satisfaction and the legitimacy and the validation. You put the two together, you create God's name. That becomes a vehicle for God, a vehicle for the one God. I mentioned this in an earlier class, that the Arizal says that whenever you give tzedakah, you recreate God's name. What does that mean, you recreate God's name? You actually physically create God's name. And how so? You take a coin represents the letter Yud. Yud is like a dot. So a coin is like a dot. And then you put it in your hand. Your hand is 5 fingers. It's expansive. It's like the letter Hey. Hey is 5. And then you stretch out your arm. That becomes like a Vav, the letter Vav. And then the poor person, the recipient, puts out his hand, which is another Hey. You spelled God's name, a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey. That's if you do it in that order. But what happens if the poor man stretches out his hand before to you first? So it's a Hey Vav, Hey Yud. It goes in the opposite direction. It's not the complete thing. It's not the complete mitzvah because you didn't create God's name in the order that it's written. But getting back to the Mishkan, it had 13 items. Whenever a person becomes bar or bat mitzvah, they create the sanctuary in them. When you're born, your godly soul starts to enter into your body. Your animal soul is there full-fledged. The baby wants to eat, it wants to be nurtured, it wants to be held, it wants to be diapered, it wants to be pampered. Every animalistic need that a human being has, a 1-hour-old baby already has. But the godly soul takes time for it to fully manifest itself. So it enters at birth. For a girl, for a boy, he has to wait to the bris, to the circumcision. And when does it become fully manifested? When do you have your full complex of spiritual energy? When you're bar or bat mitzvah. Then you have the ability to wage war, your godly soul with your animal soul, and you have the power to independently, because you're no longer dependent on your parents when you're bar or bat mitzvah, to win that battle. So it could be suggested that bar mitzvah is actually where you become a sanctuary because the godly soul is a part of God. It becomes fully revealed in you. But you need 13 years of preparation for that. And every year is like another item. And since the first item is gold, as soon as you're born with gold. Even though gold was not as ubiquitous in the construction of the Mishkan as the silver and the copper, it's mentioned first because that's the essence of every one of us. We are essentially gold. So the first thing we get, as soon as we're born, the first item we get is gold. And every year we get another quality. Each one of these 13 items represents another spiritual force. And at the time of Bar Mitzvah, we're able to construct that Mishkan, that sanctuary. Because in fact, when God commands Moses to tell the people to build the sanctuary, there's an anomaly here. He says, V'asuli migdash, make for me a sanctuary, V'shachanti b'socham, and I will dwell in them. Now, how many temples were there at a given time? One. So it should say, make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell in it. Why does it say in them? So one explanation is that when through the sanctuary that they built, God dwelled through the sanctuary within the Jewish community. But there's a deeper explanation when it says that I will dwell in them, that each one of us is a sanctuary. Just like there's a sanctuary in a holy temple in the desert and later on in Israel and Jerusalem, every one of us, especially now that we don't have the temple, every one of us becomes that sanctuary. And in order to make that sanctuary, we need to have these 13 items. We have to go through the 13. Again, because 13 is the number that suggests love and suggests unity. And that's the underlying energy that creates the sanctuary in our own lives. What time is it?
4 o'clock.
Oh, okay. I'm used to the 7 o'clock.
So gold, silver, copper, scarlet wool, turquoise wool, purple wool.
What do they all mean?
Red dyed ram skins and takash.
That's
the only ones I can remember.
Right.
There's 8. What are the others?
I'll read them. Actually, there are 15, but Rashi says 13, so 2 of them are not counted, but we'll soon see which ones. He says gold, silver, copper, turquoise, purple, and scarlet wool, linen and goat hair, red dyed ram skins, tachash skins. It's not clear what a tachash is, there are different opinions. Acacia wood, oil for illumination, spices for the anointment oil and the aromatic incense, shoham stones, and stones for the settings, for the ephod and the breastplate. If you count it, you'll find 15. But Rashi says 13, so different commentators argue as to which 2 does he leave out. And some say he leaves out the last 2, the stones, because they were not brought by the Jewish people. They were brought by the Nesiim, the leaders of the Jewish people. Now, the Mishkan was built not with stone, as the Beit HaMikdash, as the Holy Temple. It was built with wood, boards, krushim, keresh. And there's a significance to that. The word keresh, if you rearrange the letters, it spells Sheker, falsehood. By rearranging the letters, one way you get Kesher, bound, a bond, and then keresh, a board. So how do you explain these 3 combinations of the 3 letters of the word? Falsehood, bond, and a board. That the whole purpose of the Mishkan, of the sanctuary, is to take the Sheker, the falsehood of the world, and to transform it into a bond through the boards of the Mishkan. The Mishkan was the sanctuary that created the bond between God and the Jewish people. And how did we create that bond? Through taking the falsehood of the world and transforming it. Last week in the Torah portion, we read about falsehood. The Torah says, "Midvar sheker tirchak," you shall distance yourself from falsehood, from the word of falsehood. No other commandment in the Torah does it say that you shall distance yourself from it, distance yourself from murder, distance yourself from theft. It's obvious, it's a crime, you should distance yourself from a crime. But why does the Torah focus on falsehood more than any other sin, that you should distance yourself? So one explanation is, when a person does a sin, the Torah, when it refers to a person sinning, it says nefesh, a soul, kisechta, that will sin. So the Zohar says, nefesh? Tva, it's puzzling. How could a Jewish soul sin? It doesn't make any sense. It's totally irrational. What does that mean? That means when a person sins, they should know that that's not them. That's not who they are. When a person thinks of himself or herself as a sinner, that's a recipe for depression and giving up hope that you'll ever change and resigning yourself to your fate and continuing to sin. Because if you can't change, you might as well enjoy life. And if enjoying life means sinning, why should I even bother to change? I can't change because this is who I am. It's, I think, one of the worst things that you hear people saying when you challenge them about things is, don't ask me to do this, that's not me. Now sometimes it may be true, but I'm saying it became a cliche that is very debilitating because it gets people convinced that there's no way that they can ever accomplish something because I'm not that type of person, I can't do it. A Jew, especially a Jew, no human being should ever define themselves by their handicap, by their inability to do something. That's superimposed on them, and the same thing with a sin. They shouldn't define yourself by your sins. The famous, in Hasidic circles, it's a famous story. There was a Chassid in Europe, Chassidim, and even in America, dressed a certain way, but he was in business. So when he had to meet his business associates and customers who were not Jewish, he would dress up in a modern attire, just like everyone else did. But when he would come to see his Rabbi, he would be dressed in the Hasidic garb, even though that's not the way he dressed most of the time. And then one year he decides, why am I fooling my Rabbi? He might think that I dress like this all the time. I'm going to come dressed to him the way I dress for my business dealings. And he comes to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe asked him, why are you dressed this way? You never used to dress this way. He said, I don't want to fool you, Rebbe. This is not the way I dress the Chassidic way all the time. I dress the way I'm dressed now. The Rebbe said, I thought it was the other way around. I thought that when you dress like the Chassid, that was who you are. That's your way of dressing. And the way you dressed for business, that was a deviation. That you changed because of the need for the business dealing. Now you're telling me that that's your real nature? That's who you really are? No, that couldn't be that way. So the reason why the Torah makes a major point about not lying is because all sins are lies. Every sin that we commit is a lie. It's not us. It doesn't mean we don't take responsibility for it. It doesn't mean we're not blamed for it, but it doesn't define who we are, and we can never accept it, that that's our reality. No matter how much a person does wrong, they could always change, and the reason they can always change is because they don't have to change. They have to just be themselves. That's why, we mentioned this many times, the Hebrew word teshuvah, which is usually translated as repentance, means return. Return to your real self, because that's who you really are. So that's what the Mishkan was all about. It was taking the Sheker, the falsehood of the world, the falsehood that defines you in a negative way and makes you feel that you are a nobody and you're worthless, and it transforms it into a bond with God, or reveals that bond that was always there. Your bond was always there, but you are not aware of it, or you forgot about it, and the Mishkan was there to remind you. So when a Jew came into the Holy Temple, among other things, what did he feel? He felt the presence of God, but he also felt himself. He felt his true self. He was in touch with his true self. And that's what, by extension, all of Torah is about. It's about recognizing the reality of who we really are and living in accordance with that reality and running away from the reality that is contrived and artificial. taking the Sheker, the false reality, and turning it into the bond that really exists. And it's not a coincidence that they have the same letters, because the whole idea of the falsehood was us to engage it and transform it. People shouldn't be afraid of confronting falsehood, because that's why we're here. The world is a false world. That's an Talmudic expression. We're living in Alma de Shikra, Aramaic for a false world. All you have to do is listen to politicians. That's all you hear. But it's not only fakers who are open liars. Everything about this world covers up the reality, and that's why we lose hope, because we see things falsely. We don't see things in the true reality.